It isn't a glitch in the matrix, it's a signal flare. I've been staring at these GDP projection charts for 6 hours straight, and the divergence is so violent that I had to cross-reference the data 3 separate times just to make sure I wasn't looking at a typo. You need to look closely at what is happening in Caracas right now, because the mainstream financial press is terrified to touch this story. They're burying it on page 16 because it shatters the entire narrative they've been feeding you for 5 years. Here's the reality. While the Eurozone is fighting to stay above 0% growth, while Germany is deindustrializing, while the average American is watching their grocery bill climb another 12%, Venezuela, the failed state, the pariah, the country we were told was totally isolated from the global economy, is posting a projected 9% GDP growth rate for 2025. 9%. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, that's state propaganda. That's Maduro cooking the books. I thought that too. So I dug into the independent data. I looked at the United Nations Development Program figures. I looked at the tanker tracking data in the Caribbean. Even the most conservative, Western-aligned institutions are forced to admit that the growth is real. They might peg it at 6 or 7%, but the trend line is undeniable. Do you understand what that means? It means the maximum pressure campaign, the sanctions, the financial blockade, it isn't just failing, it has totally backfired. They told us that if we cut a country off from the US dollar, their economy would collapse and they would come crawling back to the table. They told us the SWIFT system was the ultimate weapon. But if a nation can grow at 9% without us, without the dollar, without Western banks, then what is the dollar actually worth? You feel it, right? That pit in your stomach when you look at your savings account? The reason your money buys less isn't just inflation. It's because the global demand for the system that supports your money is evaporating. We're watching the end of financial deterrence in real time. And the scariest part isn't the growth number itself, it's how they're doing it. I've been tracking the maritime data, and I found something that should scare the hell out of anyone relying on a 401k. There's a massive, invisible network moving billions of dollars of energy right under the nose of the US Navy. It's not magic, it's a mechanism. And once you see how this shadow fleet operates, you will realize that the Western economic model isn't just stagnant, it's being bypassed. Let me explain who is actually pulling the strings here. To understand why this is happening today, to understand why a failed state is posting growth numbers that would make a European finance minister weep with jealousy, you have to go back to a very specific set of assumptions made in Washington around 2019. I dug through the archives of the Treasury Department's OFAC, that's the Office of Foreign Asset Control. These are the guys who essentially hold the kill switch for the global banking system. Back then, the logic was clinically simple. It was almost elegant. The theory was that if you cut off the cash flow from PDVSA, Venezuela's state oil giant, the regime wouldn't just struggle, it would evaporate. The thinking was that modern economies run on credit. They run on parts from Houston and software from Silicon Valley, and they settle trades in New York. If you sever those arteries, the patient dies on the table within months. It wasn't an evil plan, it was an arrogant one.
It was a plan designed by people who believe the world ends at the edge of the SWIFT banking network. They looked at their spreadsheets, they looked at the crushing debt load of Caracas, and they said mathematically this regime is dead walking. But here we are in December 2025, and not only is the patient walking, he is running a marathon. Now, I know what the skeptics are screaming right now. I can hear the CNBC talking heads in my ear. They're saying, relax, this is just a dead cat bounce. The economy shrank by 75% over the last decade. Growing 9% from zero is easy. Stop. You need to stop listening to that noise because it is dangerous. It assumes that economic growth happens by magic. Think about the physics of it. Even if you are starting from zero, to grow at 9%, you need capital. You need massive liquidity to repair the oil rigs. You need hard currency to pay the dock workers. You need insurance to move the tankers. Where did that money come from? If the U.S. banking system is closed and the European markets are closed and the IMF isn't cutting checks, where is the liquidity coming from to fuel a 9% expansion? That is the question that nobody in the White House wants to answer, because the answer is that Venezuela didn't just survive, they completely re-architected their reality. While our leaders were busy issuing press releases and adding names to blacklists, Maduro and his inner circle, along with their new best friends in Moscow and Beijing, were building a parallel operating system. I want you to zoom in on the energy sector data from Q3 2025. Look at the export destinations. 5 years ago, most of that heavy crude was going to refineries on the U.S. Gulf Coast. It was a straight line, easy to track, easy to tax, easy to stop. Today, that oil is vanishing into a black hole in the South China Sea. The villain here isn't just a dictator in a tracksuit. The villain is the hubris of the West. We thought we owned the ocean. We thought we owned the concept of money. But look at the granular detail of the production figures. The UNDP report explicitly mentions a 15.3% jump in oil activity. You don't get a 15% jump in heavy industry with hope. You get it with heavy machinery. You get it with specialized diluents required to make Venezuelan sludge pumpable. Those chemicals used to come from the US. Now, they are coming from Iran. I found shipping manifests, digital fragments of them, showing a steady stream of condensate arriving at the Jose terminal. Do you see the pattern? Every time we closed a door, we assumed they would be trapped in the room. Instead, they just smashed a hole in the wall and built a bridge to the east. And the leaders in the West, they're trapped in a cognitive dissonance loop. I've watched the press briefings. They keep repeating the same phrases: terrorist designation, illicit flows, Pariah State. They're using moral language to describe a logistical failure. They cannot admit that the sanctions forced Venezuela to become hyper-efficient at smuggling. We created a natural selection pressure cooker. The incompetent parts of the regime died off years ago. What's left? What's left is a hardened, battle-tested network of financial smugglers who know exactly how to bypass the U.S. Treasury. And here's the kicker. Here's the part that really keeps me up at night. This isn't just about Venezuela surviving, it's about them thriving because of the isolation. By cutting them off from the dollar, we forced them to dollarize their economy on the street level, using physical cash, while conducting state business in yuan, rubles, and crypto. We inadvertently inoculated them against our own leverage. If the U.S. Federal Reserve raises rates, Venezuela doesn't care. They aren't borrowing in dollars anymore. If the U.S. threatens to cut off SWIFT, they haven't used SWIFT in years. Do you realize what we've done? We tried to build a prison, but we forgot to check if the other inmates had sledgehammers. And the Strategic Partnership Treaty that Maduro signed with Russia late this year, the one the media called symbolic, I read the text. It's not symbolic. It includes provisions for sovereign payment systems and mutual defense of trade routes. That is diplomatic code for, we will move our oil, and if you try to stop it, you aren't just seizing a Venezuelan ship, you're seizing a Russian asset. They have raised the stakes to a level that Washington isn't ready for. So when you see that 9% growth figure, don't see it as a statistic. See it as a tombstone for the era of American financial dominance. But how? How do you actually move millions of barrels of oil across a planet covered in U.S. surveillance satellites without getting caught? The mechanism is genuinely genius and terrifying. Think about it like this. I want you to visualize a high-end, exclusive casino in Las Vegas. For 70 years, the United States has been the house. We own the building, we own the chips, we write the rules. If you want to play the game of global trade, if you want to buy oil, sell wheat, or move cargo, you have to use our chips. That's the US dollar, and you have to play at our tables. That's the SWIFT banking system. So back in 2019, Venezuela starts acting up.
The House manager, the U.S. president, gets angry. He walks over to the Venezuelan table, grabs their chips, kicks them out the front door, and bans them for life. The House assumes that Venezuela is now broke. They can't gamble, so they can't eat. They're standing alone in the desert. But here is what we missed. We stopped looking at them. We went back to counting our money, assuming they were dying of thirst outside. But Venezuela didn't leave the property. They just went around the back, into the alleyway. And guess who was waiting there? The other guys we kicked out. Russia is there. Iran is there. And there are some high rollers from China who are tired of the House rules, so they're hanging out in the alley too. At first, it was messy. They were trading scraps. It was a barter economy. I'll give you a barrel of oil for a crate of machine parts. It was inefficient. But, and this is the part that explains that 9% growth figure, over the last 3 years, they didn't just survive in the alley. They built their own casino. It's not as pretty as ours. It doesn't have the velvet ropes or the free drinks, but the game is running. They built a shadow casino where the chips aren't US dollars, they're yuan or rubles or crypto. And the tables aren't SWIFT, they're encrypted messaging apps and decentralized ledgers. And the worst part? The House, the US, can look out the window and see the lights on in the alley. We can hear the music. We know they're gambling, but we can't stop it without burning down the entire neighborhood. Let me drop the metaphor and show you exactly how the mechanics of this shadow casino works, because it is sophisticated, it is industrial scale, and it is happening right now. It starts with the Dark Fleet. I was tracking a vessel, let's call it Tanker X, that left the port of Jose in Venezuela in late October 2025. According to its automatic identification system, that's the transponder that tells satellites where a ship is, Tanker X was sitting idly off the coast of Senegal, West Africa. But here's the thing, I pulled the satellite imagery for those coordinates. The ocean was empty, no ship. So where was Tanker X? It was actually loading 2 million barrels of heavy crude in Venezuela. The transponder in Senegal was a ghost signal, a digital spoof designed to fool the U.S. Navy and the insurance adjusters. Once loaded, Tanker X doesn't sail to China. That's too obvious. It sails to a transshipment hub, usually a spot in the middle of the ocean near Malaysia or Togo. It meets up with another ship, Tanker Y, which is legitimate. They turn off their lights, lash the ships together, and pump the oil from X to Y. Tanker Y then sails to a teapot refinery in Shandong, China. These are independent refineries that don't have international exposure. They don't care about U.S. sanctions because they don't do business in New York. They buy the oil at a discount, refine it, and sell it into the hungry Asian market. Money made. Sanctions bypassed. But wait, how do they get paid? You can't wire $1 billion for an oil shipment through JP Morgan. The alarms would go off instantly. This is where the digital alley comes in. Reports are surfacing of massive settlements using USDT, Tether, and other stablecoins. Think about the irony of this. They're using a cryptocurrency that is pegged to the US dollar to bypass the US government. The buyer in China deposits the equivalent value into a digital wallet. The seller in Caracas receives it in seconds. No banks, no intermediaries, no OFAC oversight. The money just teleports. Then the Venezuelan government takes that crypto and uses it to pay Russian contractors to fix the rigs or Iranian engineers to upgrade the refineries. It's a closed-loop economy that operates at the speed of light, completely invisible to the Western financial police. And honestly, I almost feel bad for the U.S. Treasury officials. Almost. Because they painted themselves into this corner. They are trapped in an empathy trap. They know this is happening. The satellites see the ships. The NSA sees the crypto flows. But what can they do? If they physically seize the ships in international waters, that is an act of war against China or Russia. That's World War III. If they sanction the Chinese banks that facilitate the back end of these trades, they crash the global economy and destroy the supply chain for Walmart and Apple. So they are paralyzed. They have to stand at the window of the main casino and watch the shadow casino steal their customers, because trying to stop the game in the alley would blow up the building. I know, listening to this, it sounds like dystopian fiction. It sounds like something out of a cyberpunk novel, ghost ships and crypto oil. But look at the growth chart again, 9%. That number is the proof that the system works. And here's the domino effect nobody is talking about. This is the sequence that leads to the cliff edge. First, Venezuela proves the model works. They show the world that you can grow faster outside the US system than inside it. Second, other fence-sitter nations are watching. Saudi Arabia, Brazil, India, South Africa. They see that the US weapon is jammed. They realize they don't have to fear the sanctions anymore. Third, they start moving their own trade into the shadow casino. Not all of it, just a little at first, maybe 10%, then 20%. Fourth, the demand for the US dollar drops. And this is the terrifying part. The value of the dollar, the reason we can print trillions of dollars of debt without hyperinflation, is based on the fact that the whole world needs dollars to trade oil. If Venezuela, Russia, China, and Iran create a system where they don't need dollars, then all those dollars come flooding back home. And when they come home, the inflation we saw in 2023 and 2024, that will look like a picnic. We are watching the structural dismantling of the American financial empire, brick by brick, barrel by barrel. And the scariest part is that the politicians in Washington are still acting like it's 1999. They are still issuing subpoenas and writing stern letters. They don't realize the game has changed. The lock on the door is broken, and the inmates aren't just escaping, they are building a new prison for us. So where does this go next? What happens when the shadow casino becomes bigger than the main house? I'm going to tell you exactly what the next 6 to 12 months look like, and it is not going to be pretty. Here is the ugly truth. I wish I could sit here and tell you that the grown-ups are going to fix this. I wish I could tell you that the Treasury Department has a secret plan to shut down this shadow casino and restore the value of your dollar. I wish I could tell you that prices are going to come back down to where they were in 2019. But I promised you I wouldn't lie to you. The data says that isn't going to happen. In fact, the data says we are about to enter the most dangerous phase of this entire transition. Over the next 6 to 12 months, we are going to see a desperate flailing from the Western powers. They see the same 9% growth charts I do. They see the tankers disappearing, and they are going to panic. You are going to see headlines about secondary sanctions. You are going to see the U.S. threatening to kick Chinese banks out of the financial system. You might even see the U.S. Navy intercept a ship in the Caribbean, trying to make an example of it. But it's a trap. It's whack-a-mole on a global scale. Every time we try to tighten the screws, the shadow economy just builds another workaround. If we block the banks, they switch to crypto. If we block the crypto, they switch to gold. If we block the straits, they switch to pipelines. And here is the mathematical reality that is going to hit your wallet in 2026: the Great Bifurcation. We are splitting into two separate worlds. World A is the dollar zone, North America, Europe, Australia. World B is the shadow zone, China, Russia, Venezuela, Iran, and the global south. Here is why that destroys your standard of living. The shadow zone has all the stuff. They have the oil, Venezuela, Russia, Iran, and they have the factories, China. The dollar zone has the services and the financial products. For the last 40 years, we could print paper, dollars, and trade it for their stuff, oil, iPhones. It was a great deal for us. But now, the shadow zone is trading with each other. Venezuela sends oil to China. China sends machines to Venezuela. Russia sends fertilizer to Brazil. Brazil sends food to Russia. They're cutting us out of the circle. So in the next year, you're going to see a phenomenon that economists call cost-push inflation. It won't be because the Fed printed money. It'll be because the things we need to buy, energy, rare earth metals, cheap plastic goods, are going to get more expensive for us than they are for them. If a factory in Germany has to pay $90 for a barrel of freedom oil, but a factory in China can pay $60 for a barrel of shadow oil from Venezuela, who wins? German industry collapses, prices in Europe skyrocket, and the U.S. consumer, you and me, we get stuck with the bill. Now, I want you to close your eyes for a second. Don't actually close them, just visualize this. I want you to imagine walking into your local grocery store in 2030, 5 years from now. The lighting is the same, the music is the same, but look at the shelves. You notice that the imported section has shrunk. The cheap electronics, the cheap toys, the cheap out-of-season fruit, it's either gone or it's 3 times the price. You pull out your phone to pay, but your bank app has a new notification. It asks you to verify what you're buying. It asks for your carbon allowance. It asks for the origin of the product. Why? Because in a world where resources are scarce for the West, freedom of consumption becomes a luxury we can't afford. This is the future the data is pointing to, a slow, grinding erosion of the abundance we grew up with. It's not an overnight apocalypse. It's not Mad Max. It's just shabbier. It's harder. It's a world where you work harder to buy less. So, what do you do? I'm not a financial advisor. I'm just a guy reading the tea leaves. But if you were my brother or my best friend, here is what I would tell you. First, stop waiting for normal. Normal is dead. The era of cheap goods and unquestioned American dominance is over, except that the sooner you grieve that loss, the sooner you can adapt. The people who will get crushed are the ones waiting for prices to go back to 2019 levels. They aren't going back. Second, get sovereign. If the global supply chains are breaking up, you need to shorten your own supply chain. I don't mean become a doomsday prepper and live in a bunker. That's fear, not strategy. I mean, look at your life. Who fixes your car? Do you know a guy, or do you rely on a dealership that needs parts from overseas? Where does your food come from? A mega corporation or a local farmer you can actually talk to? Who holds your wealth? Is it all in a digital number on a screen that can be devalued by inflation? Or do you own things that are real? Tools, land, skills? In the shadow economy era, the most valuable currency isn't Bitcoin or dollars, it's competence. Can you fix things? Can you build things? Can you solve problems without calling a 1-800 number? Third, diversify your optionality. The US dollar isn't going to disappear tomorrow. It's still the biggest ship in the ocean, but it's taking on water. If 100% of your life relies on the dollar system working perfectly, you are fragile. Maybe you need to learn a second language. Maybe you need a passport. Maybe you need to understand how crypto actually works, not to speculate, but to know how to move value if the banks lock the doors. The strategic economies, Venezuela, Russia, China, they have spent 10 years building a lifeboat. You need to build yours. Because here's the final thought I want to leave you with. When Nicolas Maduro went on TV and laughed about the sanctions, when he bragged about that 9% growth, he wasn't laughing at the sanctions. He was laughing at us. He was laughing because he knows the secret that our leaders are terrified to admit. The walls we built to keep them out are actually locking us in. The world is changing. The center of gravity is shifting, and the only way to survive the shift is to open your eyes, look at the data, and realize that the map you were given in school doesn't match the territory anymore. Stay sharp, stay skeptical, and for the love of God, watch the hands, not the mouth. I'll see you in the comments.